Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the budget meeting this morning. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the Finance Committee for their efforts and Sharon Landell, our controller, and obviously Mr. Joe Burden, our COO. Thank you for your efforts and the rest. I hope we can explain all of your questions and answer them, and we appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much, Mr. Burden. Please, thank you.
All right, good morning, everybody. We'll get ready. This should take about 4 hours, so we're going to go line by line. You weren't ready for that? Okay, I'll give you the summary then. Okay. All right, we'll get started. Hello, everybody out there in Zoom world. You should see the screen. We are recording this as well, so for those people that weren't able to join us or be on Zoom today. Also, the slides will be available online for you to download. And those of you that are here, you have the slides. So we'll get started. Just a couple of maybe footnotes before we get started. This of the 3 years of budgets that Sharon and I have had the pleasure of developing, this was the most challenging for sure. There's all kinds of what-if scenarios also, and I think the tone of this presentation is going to be, the fact that some of the market pressures that are out there and have been out there since COVID in regards to labor and expenses finally caught up with us. And I'll share you some, I think, interesting data that we were able to uncover to show you how the last couple of years we've been a little insulated, I think, from some of those pressures that are out there. But as we got through this year especially, and I think the hurricane compounded it, we had to take into account those inflationary factors. So hopefully I can share with you what we did to get to where we are and some of the data that we use. So we'll get going here. Budget process real quick. I always just like to do a quick little 2-minute tutorial of how we go about doing these things. Really is a pre-planning phase, the procedure of developing the budget, and then of course how we calculate the fees in total. One of the first things we do with every budget is we try to define objectives. Sometimes the objectives are the same from the previous year, but we always have a few that are specific. So the ones that we really looked at this year, obviously we want to project our expenses based on the level of services we believe that you all desire. We needed to develop this year strategies to balance significant cost of labor increases, review the operating expenditures with department managers to create efficiencies to minimize ongoing increases. We always forecast revenue based on historical data. We always do a review of the allocation percentages, those line item expenses that have to be allocated from the community to golf. And so that was part of the process. Verify the 23-24 purchase needs and update our reserve line items, and then plan the appropriate operating capital needs as well. And then, of course, coming off the 21-22 fiscal year, we had a surplus. So our documents have us using that surplus in the following year after those are audited. So we're using the 21-22 surplus in this next operating budget. Preparation, one of the big things that we look to from the departmental managers is trying to get them to forecast, where we are in each department, try to determine what you all want, and then be able to try to put together a plan on what we can do to get there. We also want to determine what level of amenities and services each department desires to produce, desires to produce and what that will cost. I mean, essentially, the operating statement at a club like this, a community or a club, is really just a vehicle to provide the services and amenities that you want. We are a break-even budget philosophy, so we're not budgeting for a profit. We're certainly not trying to budget for a loss either, but we try to forecast expenses because we're going to consume those expenses in next fiscal year to give you, the owner, the services and the programs that you want. So that's really the high-level philosophy. And if you remember back in the long-range planning days, you know, the essence of a successful club doesn't reside in the operating statement. It resides on how you're building your assets year over year, how you're growing your net worth. And the only way you grow net worth isn't from the operating statement, because we're not churning a profit off of that. You grow net worth at a club because you're growing your asset base without taking on additional liabilities. So through the capital improvement fund or through an assessment, and you improve a facility or you remodel or you build a new building, that's going to grow your asset base. In essence, that's going to grow your net worth. So again, the operating statement's important because we have to live underneath that, but it's really just for consumption year over year. And then of course, we want to make sure that we expect or look at any one-time items that sometimes pop up on any given year that we need to budget for. Yep. Oh. All right. Are you getting more than one person tell you that? Volume's low. Okay. Hopefully Zoom can hear us better out there. I was getting a message that Zoom couldn't hear us, so. See if, Jan, if you want to text Sharon back, let us know if that's any better or not. Okay, we'll keep going. Hopefully they can hear us there. So moving along here, the other part we want to do, we do a lot of research. We try to look at historical financial data and performance. We look and compare ourselves to other SEER clubs, other bundle communities in the area, as well as other like clubs. The SEER club, the bundle community down here in Southwest Florida is very unique, and it does provide a great benchmark for us because typically those people in a bundle community, you know, they're coming in here because they want that convenience of paying a fee and getting everything included. And so we're unique in that we've got another maybe half dozen or another dozen or so clubs like us in the Southwest Florida market that run like we do, bundled, everything's included. You have to live here to be a member, that sort of thing. So, okay. Yeah, I'm going to try to switch the microphone here. Give me just a second. All right, Jen, is that any better on the microphone? Can you hear that? There may be an echo now, though. Okay, I'm getting messages that works better. Okay. There's an echo. Okay. Can you guys hear me okay if I don't use a microphone? If I scream a little bit? Okay. That way Zoom will be able to hear us a little better. Okay. All right, we'll get back going here. Sorry about that. All right. Okay, we'll get back going here. Hopefully everybody can see that. Hopefully the screen's back up on Zoom. And then we look at current industry trends, and then we develop our budget assessment. So we'll get down to the nitty gritty. The process is the same process we've used before here. The process starts with our department heads. We basically give them essentially a blank column for this fiscal year, and then they get 5 years of the past historical data, and we ask them to give us and develop a draft based on their department. I typically will meet with them one-on-one, and then we'll meet together with Sharon, go through some back and forth, which is always part of the process, scrutinize, what their estimations are, and then essentially come up with a draft budget that we then meet with the finance committee. The finance committee, we go kind of through that very much in detail. They give us feedback, and then we move on to the LCA board where we present that to them in conjunction with the finance committee. And that happened last week. And that's why the budget was mailed to you all earlier this week. It'll be up for adoption on the 28th of February. So how fees are calculated, really 3 different compartments. So you've got your operating assessment, and that basically is just the net of revenue minus expenses. You've also got your operating capital assessment, which would be for capital improvements that aren't on the reserve spreadsheet, things that we don't reserve for. And then you've got the reserve funding. So those are items that typically we're reserving for over the course of multiple years, and then it's time to replace them. The money's there to be spent, but we got to continue to refund those line items. So 3 different areas really equate to what you pay to Lexington to be an owner here. So in terms of fees per unit, the left-hand column here shows you, there's a typo there, it's 2223, that's last year's. Last year's amount was $5,064 annually, or $1,266 quarterly. When you compare that to what this budget presents, this budget's $5,640 annually and $1,410 quarterly. That's an increase of $576 for the year and $144 a quarter. That is an 11.4% increase, which is a significant increase. And part of what we'll get into now is to try to show you where those numbers come from and why that increase is significant as it is this current year. This spreadsheet breaks down pretty much the different areas that the budget comes from. The bottom here, the bottom right corner, there's that 576 and 144 number and the 11.4%. If you look up, then you can break that out into the 3 sections. So just below the big black line that totals there to the right, you'll see that the operating assessment is up $562 annually. So pretty much a good portion of the annual increase is from the operating statement, from labor and expenses. A little bit of a downtick in operating capital, $12 less annually. And then if you go to the next line there, reserve funding is up $36 annually. So again, if you total all up, that's $576. The important number on this page, though, is up here on the right-hand side. It's this $816,406. So that essentially, if you take that number and you divide it by 1479, that's where you're going to get the $552 per member. That is the difference in this budget compared to last budget when you net out revenue from expenses. And that's the number we want to focus on, because I'm going to try to show you what are the driving factors of that $816,000. So one of the things that we always do every year is we want to benchmark ourselves with other CERA clubs. And I mentioned earlier that this was kind of the budget. The challenge of this budget was some of the inflationary pressure, some of the market conditions really caught up with us this year. What this graph shows you is looking back at the last 3 years operating assessment and what those increases were for us versus how that compares to other CERA clubs. And this is why I mentioned that for whatever reason, we were a little insulated early on coming out of COVID, coming through COVID and out of COVID, in that in the 21-22 budget, we only had a 0.6% increase in operating assessment. In the next year's budget, which is the current year, we had a 1.2% increase. And this year it was a 13% increase. That's the 816,000 compared to those 3 years with CERA clubs, 6, 9, and 6. So comparing over the last 3 years, it is a little bit of an easier number to digest, but I know because I've been doing this 25 years, owners always have a short-term memory. You kind of forgot that you didn't have a big increase the last 2 years, and you're kind of focused on the 13%. So we're going to dig deeper into why that's 13% this year as well. Another interesting number, I think that it's what we always look at, but I'm not sure we've shared this type of benchmark with you all. You know, we talk a lot about how we need to remain competitive, especially with other Sierra clubs. And certainly our fees is one of those ways we stay competitive. Definitely the amenities and services we provide is important, but also what does it cost somebody buying into the community versus if they bought in another Sierra club. But you can see here, if you just simply take operating expenses and divide it by members, we are still in the way lower half of what you see in the competitor Sierra clubs. You can see that we've increased, and that is proportionate to what you saw on the last slide. But we're still just under 7,000, where the average Sierra club pays about $800 there to be an owner as far as expenses go. So that $816,000 difference that's really driving the operating assessment can be looked at from two different areas. The first is going to be on the operating expense side. So of that 816, 204,338 is coming from the operating expense side. And we all know from an expense perspective, nothing's cheaper than it was a year ago for sure. But I think what's notable here, and I think where credit needs to be passed along, is to our departmental managers, because if you take that 204,000 and you pull out these three items, insurance, utilities, and the contractual increase with Comcast, that actually equates to a $237,000 increase year over year budget. So every bit and then some of the operating expense increase is being driven by really those three factors that really are not controllable for us, assuming we want to continue with the same insurance coverages and we don't want to devalue insurance, and utilities, assuming we're going to use utilities the same way that we always have. There's not a lot of control there. So again, the credit really goes to the departmental managers. One of the objectives that I took you through was how do we come up with strategies to control operating expenses in an effort to keep the increase as far down as possible. And certainly the department managers met that objective when they looked at what they need to operate their club from an expense perspective. The big number here, though, is, yes, sir.
I have a question on the previous slide.
Yeah.
You're only analyzing the variance, that is the difference from one year to the next. So the insurance cost is not 119,000.
Nope, that is the increase. We're anticipating a 50% increase on insurance. If you recall the last 2 years, again, this aligns with what we're seeing overall. We have been insulated from insurance increases. A lot of your communities started seeing insurance increases a year or even 2 years ago. At LCA, we have been fortunate in that we've been able to kind of keep that down, but that pressure really went through the roof this year. But we're anticipating a 50% increase on our property and liability insurance this year.
So you're expecting total insurance to be in the neighborhood of, say, 240,000, 250,000.
Could be close. Yeah, I mean, Sharon would have the exact number, but this is what the estimated budgeted increase. At this point in time, all that we have with our insurance carriers are discussions on what the market looks like. We haven't renewed yet. The renewal period starts in May. So with the timing of us doing this budget, we do have to forecast. But that's what we forecasted after that discussion. But yeah, significant increase.
Insurance is 424.
424. So overall, I think property, we budgeted 50. Some of the other insurance line items weren't quite that high. So the overall increase, if we're at 424, is probably closer to 30 or 35%. Okay. Mr. Collins.
Question on the Comcast contract. How many years has that got left to run, or what's the basis for their increase?
Yep, 4% a year, and we've got at least 2 more full years on that.
And it's
End of 25. End of calendar year 25. Yep. So we'll get into labor, and this is where the big number really shows up. So 621,000 of the 816 is derived from payroll and related expenses. And this is really where, we've seen a lot of pressure, more so probably the last 8 months in terms of labor market. If you remember, probably the last two budget presentations and communications we've had with you as we went through a 1.5 year period there through COVID, where it was a scarce labor market for us. We were having trouble recruiting employees here, and one of those reasons was there were places that were paying their employees larger salaries to come on board. And we tried to manage the lower salaries without making the big increases and tried to piece parts together. And we got through COVID by doing that. But the reality is probably looking back at the start of this fiscal year, that the need to acquire employees and the need to move those starting wages up really started to have an impact on us. And it really is twofold. It's the ability to attract new employees and having a higher starting salary or wage. But then the other issue that comes up is if you're out there and we're having to raise our base wage for, let's say, a ground staff person to $16 an hour, and we've got 7 people on staff that are making $14 an hour, you need to increase those 7 staffers up to $16 an hour. There's no way you can hire in and expect those other ones to stick around. And so when you look at this 621 and we break it down into these subcategories, under the wages, 404,000 of the 621 is strictly to wages, and that's broken into 2 areas. And one of those is under raises. So raises, the reason it has an asterisk is because the raises are accounting for the normal increases, annual increases, performance increases that we budget on an annual basis, but it also includes those raises that we had to do over the last 8 or 9 months in this fiscal year to bring kind of that base level worker up to the starting wage. And so that wasn't budgeted last year, but we have to put it in this year's budget. So that's impacted the cost of labor in this year's budget. That number is 223. The additional staff, if you recall last year's budget, we had in the budget, it was approved for the addition of 3 new staff people. One was an additional housekeeper, one or cleaning, one was maintenance on Tyler staff and LCA maintenance, and the other was somebody that was here full-time during the busy months to help with the pools. Those weren't budgeted for full year last year. Those were all positions that we brought on as the season started. So we only had 3 or maybe 4 months in the budget. So we had to bring that into the budget for 12 months. And then the other addition was the addition of an assistant general manager that was not in last year's budget, that is now in this year's budget. So those are the 2 big numbers driving the 404. Payroll taxes are going to go up whenever wages go up. So that $93,000 is really just a percent of wages. Health insurance benefits, we're budgeting a 12% increase, which is pretty much what we've seen in the market, low single-digit increases. We've been fortunate. I can tell you, I know clubs that have seen double that over the last couple of years. We do a really good job shopping that program around, trying to make sure we keep good benefits for our employees, but also keep an eye on cost. But 12% is the increase. Yes, sir.
Joe, do I understand that our grounds people want to see paid $14 an hour? I mean, you said 7 of them. I think all of them. How many people pay $14 an hour?
I made up a number there. I wasn't saying specifically. I was giving you a general example. I don't have in front of me that type of data. I don't know what the starting rate is for grounds. I just don't have it with me. But I was just making a number and referencing a grounds department and putting a number out there as an example.
So are they being paid $14 an hour, 17 or 16?
Mr. Lawver, I don't know what I don't have that number right here in front of me. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Mr. Dedrick.
I understand
curious, how does the Jamaican workers fit into this? Are we contractually required to give them a certain wage, or how does that work?
It's a prevailing wage, and when we start that recruiting process, typically in late spring, that's when we define what that wage is. And the only time it really kicks in is if they're working during a slow period, because typically what we pay them as their base rate and what they make in gratuities far exceeds what the prevailing minimum wage is for them. It's rare that we have to subsidize their pay. And I'm not sure we've had to do it this season yet. Chris is saying no. So we've not had to do it this season. So as long as they're actively working and they're all and most of them are in service areas where they're getting gratuities, that doesn't become an issue. The other one is other employee benefits. So 46,000, pretty much that's a collection pot for other benefits like a 401k program, maybe increases to disability, employee incentive programs, our extra miler program, that sort of thing. So that accounts for 46,000 of the 621. On the golf village, so same format here. This left column is 22-23. This current fiscal year operating assessment for the golf village, in addition to what you pay for the community, is $21.72 and $5.43 a quarter. Next fiscal year, starting May 1, that would go to $23.72 annually, $5.93 a quarter. That's a $200 increase annually and a $50 increase quarterly, an overall 9.2% increase. Again, breaking it down here, you can see at the bottom right corner is that $200 and $50 number, and just beside it, the 9.2%. Golf has not seen the same impact across the board from the operation side as much as the community has. They're looking at a 5.2% increase from the operating assessment, and they're actually looking at a significant decrease, at least on a percentage basis, but not as much on a dollar basis, of $32 less for capital. However, what went up more significantly is the reserve funding. And this past year completed kind of our 2-year quest to confirm assets on our reserve spreadsheet. So we've been reviewing that the last couple of budget cycles to make sure that assets are accounted for correctly, replacement costs are accurate, useful life is accurate. This past year, we spent more time on the golf side. And so that's why there's a little bit more increase there, because we had to make some adjustments to some of the replacement cost and useful life. We're going to complete that process, that reserve audit, if you will. We have in this year's budget hiring a company to come in and do a capital reserve study for us. So that's a normal thing you would do maybe every 5 to 8 years. But we wanted to make sure that we felt that the assets were correct on there and everything was checking out. But in the budget, this next fiscal year is bringing on that capital reserve study, which then should complete the process of fully analyzing our reserves. And LCA carries about $7 million in reserves. So it's a big number, and we want to make sure that it's being accounted for correctly. Yes, sir.
So this goes back to the 2 previous slides on the budget process. You mentioned the payroll side, assistant general manager position. Is that a new position, or is that existing and is replaced? And part 3 is what would be the salary?
Sure. So assistant general manager, that was hired last budget year. It was something that the board approved during the fiscal year. Chris is right behind you. He's right there. If you've not met him before, Chris Alvarez. Not my policy to disclose staff salaries. That's nothing that I'm going to do. You're more than welcome to speak to your board about that. But you know, I manage the staff. I asked the board for approval on this budget, but I don't share other employees' salaries. So that's the golf spreadsheet there, the summary page. We'll roll into a review of capital expenditures. Again, this is what's called capital operating expenditures. Typically, when you see items hitting here, they're items, not typically, always, they're items that we don't currently have reserve funding for. A lot of times though, when we purchase something from operating capital, we will establish that as a reserve item because more than likely it's an asset that's going to need to be replaced down the road. So from the community side, and we broke this down obviously into community and golf, the community side, mobile outdoor lighting for events. If you recall, the last couple of years, we've had great success with relocating some higher end events on the driving range or outside. What we've spent in rentals for generators and lighting, we probably could have paid for this package 2 times over so far. So we want to own that equipment, so we're not coming up with a rental fee each time we do it. With what's happened at the Island Club, we've taken advantage of repurposing some spaces up there and trying to make that area more efficient for the type of business that it does. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges at the Island Club in season is we don't have the space necessarily to accommodate the demand, and we're making a lot of trips back and forth to the clubhouse to resupply. So we're looking at some additional refrigeration there. And then the other 2 items really has to do with replacement of some of our outdated banquet equipment. And banquet doesn't just mean outside events, it's for you member events as well, but some additional tables for buffets, as well as china and accessories. So that pretty much sums up the community operating capital items. On the golf side of things, new ball washers for each hole is on there, as well as replacement of the driving range mats. Now, the driving range mats have reserve funding, but the cost to replace those in this current market is more than what's in reserves. So we're recouping the balance from an operating capital assessment. So the funding will be there for that. On the reserve side of things, again, these are items that have already been funded. You all have paid into this reserve funding over the years, and all of these items are at a point in time where they're through with their useful life and they're fully funded. And now we can go ahead and replace something that we already had. So every year we always have food and beverage equipment that cycles through. So there's a listing of those items where its useful life is up, and we'll replace those items at both the clubhouse and the Island Club. We are going to do an interior painting of the clubhouse, which needs to be done en masse. We want to follow through with the new carpeting that's in this Vista room into that grill room. We did not do that when we replaced this carpet. That carpet was not flooded, but with this carpet, it doesn't really match what's in there. And we want to carry this theme through to that grill room. So that's in there. We labeled it bocce restroom upgrade. There are 3 restrooms that are around the property, around the golf course, around the tennis court and bocce court up here. The way that those have been allocated over the years is the golf operation, the golf village takes care of 2 of those in terms of expenses, and the community takes care of 1. The one the community takes care of is the one that we call the bocce restroom. We have a plan this year where we want to update, refurbish those restrooms. It would involve reflooring, new fixtures, really try to bring those restrooms a little bit more up to date. The flooring in there really is at a point where you can't clean it any further. It looks like it's dirty, but it's not. It's cleaned every day. But we really just need to update those spaces on the course. So from the community side of things, the reserve funding is for the bocce restroom there. Gate security updates. If you recall, we upgraded our technology there 2 budgets ago with the implementation of the gatehouse system. The plan there was to begin to grow that program over the years. We kind of bought in at a base level. So the upgrades that are in this budget include a driver's license reader that will scan a driver's license and automatically attach that to the visitor that's showing up on property. This gives us one more level of security as to who enters our gates, as well as gives us the ability maybe to track back somebody when we pull up their guest pass. The other big improvement with this would be upgrading some of our cameras to HD cameras. We've got quite a few security cameras around the property, but they are getting old and dated. And sometimes when you go to look back at these, the visuals are kind of grainy, so that they're due for an upgrade. So those are the two major things in that category. We lost one Island Club pedestrian bridge during the storm. It's currently closed off. We had planned on replacing both of those bridges in the long-range plan. But we're going to go ahead and put that funding into next year's budget to go ahead and replace both of the Island Club bridges. It'll be with a composite decking material that won't require us to have that ongoing maintenance of painting and cleaning as much. But we've got budget money in there for that. It's about $50,000 or so per bridge to do that work. Tennis court reconditioning is in the budget. So there's different things that have to happen with the tennis courts over the years. One is your recondition. You're basically bringing in anywhere from 5 to 10 tons of sand of clay on each court, putting that back down, making sure it's level. So that's on the reserve sheet for this year. We always have a stipend every year for computer and technology upgrades. We always have a rotating list of computers that need to be rotated out or upgrades we want to make. The irrigation pump is in the budget this year. It has a star and golf in there because this is an allocation, because we use one irrigation pump for both the community and the golf side. We allocate that in terms of usage and expenses to either the golf village or the community. So part of this reserve line item actually has two columns, one for golf, one for community. That's why there's a star there. Also in the grounds department, same thing with a new gator, which is a multifunctional utility cart that is also allocated some to golf. And also we're due for a new tractor, a Kubota tractor that's fully funded on the reserve sheet. Again, also has some golf allocation for that. Yes.
How long will we be restricted on access to water?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you recall, a few meetings ago, we actually had the board approve this project because we wanted to be on the calendar in early January of next year. So we can manage not having water for upwards of 7 days. And so Pete was very insistent on the fact that we want to pick the time because it's a lot easier to manage in early January than to wait till February or March when you're getting even warmer air and drier air in here with no rain. So upwards of 7 days. They think best case scenario, it could be 3 to 5, but we're going to budget 7 days of no water. On the golf side, reserve funding, a new bag storage unit. This would consolidate our bag storage program. This is the type of system that's on rails. It's kind of accordion style, if you will. It's space saver. So with this new addition, we can consolidate to one area for bag storage, and it'll be a lot easier for staff to get in, grab a bag, and come back out. This also, the golf section has the other two restrooms being refurbished. So that's why course restroom upgrades 2 of 3. And then here are the other 3 line items that were allocated to community as well. I'll misspoke. The driving range mat is also getting funding from operating capital. So that's why that has a star on it, if you remember that. And then the next 2 items, various golf course equipment and irrigation pump replacement, have some allocation back to the community, going the other way this time. Definitely ready for questions. I do want to recognize some groups of people that were instrumental in developing this budget. I mean, it is a big task. It does take a lot of time, you know, even with Hurricane Ian putting us on a tight timeline this year. Everybody really pitched in and got us to this point, and it's quite an accomplishment that we were able to put this together in a short time period. But definitely your finance advisory committee, which each of your associations has a representative. Our board liaisons, Tom Zienkowski, and then our co-chairs are Steve Perall and Inga Pinkney. So thankful for those folks as well as the entire committee. Obviously, LCA board of directors. And then our executive management team, who played a very large role, and with everything they were doing to help with hurricane and et cetera, they still found time to get their job done and meet the deadline. So I'm thankful that they really kicked in on this. Be happy to answer any remaining questions you have. Yes, sir.
Joe, I was expecting in general, that there would be items in this budget to replace the damage that was done by Hurricane Ian. Just for example, so on that side of the course, you see that the fences are knocked down.
Yes.
Those are gonna need replaced. A lot of the shrubbery and so on is going to need to be replaced, which I would expect would be a fairly substantial outlay. But there's nothing in the budget that I saw that accounts what's going on.
Yeah, no, and you're right. There isn't anything. We had some long discussions about this in terms of strategically, how do we approach the fact that we know we're going to have replacement items that need to be replaced. The problem we run into is it gets back to a timing issue, right? So if you start this budget process from a statute perspective and what we have to do being an association, we have to go through a process and give certain amount of notice to you all, and the board has to approve this budget a certain amount of time before the fiscal year. The reality is, a lot of these questions in terms of how much these things are going to cost really aren't going to be able to be reconciled until we know what insurance proceeds we have coming back and how much those proceeds are going to be. We know that we have repair items to do. So really, from a philosophical perspective, this operating budget to operate the club is really independent on the expenses that potentially could come from Hurricane Ian repairs. I mean, it's really two different ideas right now. And like you all are experiencing probably with your personal insurance and in your associations, we just don't know. I mean, we've had areas inspected by both flood and property insurance inspectors, but we have yet to get a report from any of those that even gives us a preliminary idea of what coverages we have in what amounts we have. So it would have been impossible. It really wouldn't have been smart to try to project that, because there's just no way of knowing what that pot of money needs to be. So we took the approach of doing this independently.
Yeah, Joe, does that mean that when that pot of money is finalized, there'll be an assessment, or is there some kind of way to build it into the budget going forward?
Sure. At the end of the day, assessment is the way to cure all financial woes. But, that's not really the first arrow that we've got in our quiver, right? It really depends. It really depends on what are we able to use reserve money for. Remember, we have reserve money for emergencies. Okay, so it's there. We've also got reserve money for our roofs and a lot of the other structures around here. So really, at the end of the day, we have to know what the insurance proceeds are. We have to continue to finalize what the replacement costs are. And that's another factor that we're dealing with a lot of vendors. We're still waiting on 3 bids to replace the fence line. I mean, we still haven't procured those. So we don't know even what that cost is going to be. And we've got other areas. We're still waiting on 3 bids for the LCA roof. We've been a month and a half into that process with getting engineers on the roofs and vendors. So it's hard to tell. But I mean, at the end of the day, the reality is, yes, from an association perspective, if you don't have enough insurance proceeds or enough reserves to cover the damage that needs to be replaced from Ian, then assessment is really the only way to go with that. Yes. Yes, sir.
With regards to what you just discussed, during the course of the year, how will we be informed of what insurance monies have been quoted and what the charges would be for the overriding damage that's been done?
Yeah. Certainly the primary space that's going to come out at, and that discussion, that presentation is going to be at those monthly LCA board meetings or any special board meetings that the LCA Board of Directors call. I mean, we will have those discussion amongst those 7 board members, because at the end of the day, that's who's making those types of decisions. The board has to levy assessments. That's nothing that the general manager, chief operating does. So that's where that communication will come through. As I get information, I'll present that to the board, and the board then will have discussions and we'll strategize the best way to handle those things going forward. But again, just like everything else, that information is going to be out in the open. It's going to be things that if there's an assessment coming down the pipeline, it behooves the board and me to give everybody all the information they can to see why there's an assessment. So, the communication's key there. Yes, sir.
Each month, we do,
It doesn't, we're not using that microphone for Zoom, remember? So I'm,
No, but question.
oh, yeah, if Zoom won't be able to hear them anyways, but here they will, just so you know.
Each month,
Zoom's on the mic,
we
Zoom's here.
constantly track the hurricane expenses, and we report that at every board meeting on the financial report. But right now, we just don't have any information on any income, any proceeds, because we haven't received any at this time. So as we go along monthly, we will have information to provide to all the members.
and Tom, the same thing would happen on the cost side for all the damage assessments we provide, right?
As we get in repair bills, we do catalog that and report that monthly. And as we get insurance proceeds in, we can also report that monthly and, subtract and do the math.
Thank
you. Mhm.
Mr. Lauber,
I don't think I have it now.
it'll help. It will help with Zoom though. It'll help.
Hey, I've had a couple people ask me, is it possible, or will we, or can we use any money from the capital improvement fund for the capital improvement fund and the improvement fund we use? Would that be used of any part?
Good question. In my opinion, definitely the resale capital fund, if we're improving assets for the entire community, I believe that there would be access to that, but again, that would probably be something we need to confirm down the road. I think the capital improvement fund may be a little bit trickier in terms of pulling from that. But again, I think when we sit down and start working on this and have these numbers, we got to be as creative as we can, because the goal is to lessen any impact to you all, because you all also have impact on your personal property. So I think we're going to look at every tool we have available to us to help fund it without cutting off the idea of we still need to plan for our future. So regardless of Hurricane Ian or not, we do need to start thinking back about, hey, we need to be ready for the next 5 or 10 years here. So we don't want to get ourselves back in a hole and put us behind. But I think we look at all those things, definitely. Mr. Single.
Joe, this is a side item, but it's mentioned it here, talking about the Comcast contract. We're looking at like 2 years out that it's going to be expiring. That contract is significant to everybody in here, but its delivery system is also very important and I think obsolete. We're still relying on all coax cable delivery rather than fiber optics, so that whole thing is going to have to be looked at. I'm sure that the long range planning committee is going to have to be aware of that and be looking at that as well.
Yeah. I've already been contacted by other purveyors, and I've got them, ready to go when we get ready to sit down and talk. But, I think as we get through this next year, we want to start that process a year plus out from the ending of that contract. But I agree. I think the next contractor, we need to take advantage of as many upgrades as we can in terms of what's out there, technology and infrastructure wise. So yeah, it's definitely not just going to be renew Comcast. It's going to be looking at it. Yep. Yes, sir.
Joe, the monies that they gave us, the monies that we received for Comcast to come in here, is that money still on hold?
It's used every month. So it's if you look at the financials on the balance sheet, it's kept there and it's proportioned out every single month equally until the end of that contract. And we've been doing that since before I got here. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Joe, are the funds, included in the upcoming budget, or are they in recent repair budgets?
I'm sorry, the what?
The repair to the fountains in the lake.
Oh, fountains. Yeah.
Are
good question.
they included in the upcoming budget, or is there money allocated in the current budget? And what's gonna be the process for those
Yeah,
repairs?
yeah. So the fountains that we currently have that are not working, which is all of them, but were all impacted due to the storm. So they are all going on in hurricane expense. And that's one area where we're waiting to see how the insurance coverage looks at that damage and what proceeds we can get from that. So every fountain we have, even every aerator we had, was impacted because that storm surge flushed out a lot of the water in the lake. And it also damaged a lot of the electrical components that those fountains run back into, those gray boxes. So that's a hurricane item to take care of. It wouldn't be something in the budget here. Yeah. Collins.
On the wages, so that if I understand correctly, it's sort of a true up or a catch up on the existing staff. Do you foresee going forward those kind of increases, or is it going to be more along the lines of what's historically been the case?
Yeah, I mean, I where we're at now, I think we saw most of the adjustments really over the summertime happening. We really haven't seen the market continue to accelerate those starting wages. And I think we're at a very good spot, probably the best spot we've been in since I've been here in terms of new employee interest. In other words, we don't just hire somebody that gives us an application. And we were at that point in COVID. If you gave us an application, you went down and got a drug test and we hired you if you passed it. There wasn't a lot of interview going on. So we're more selective. We'll always have to be conscious of the market there. But I also think we have some cushion. I mean, the reality is there's a lot of employees that like working here, and we're really looking for the employee that's not looking necessarily only at what they make on a dollar per hour basis. So I think, we've developed some value to where we don't have to shoot up. If the market shoots up right away, it may be more delayed, like you've seen the last 3 years. So I think we've covered a lot of that. I don't see a lot of that out there. Yes, sir.
Joe, there, on the, just for example, the capital expenditure request, there was some.
Mhm.
There are some fairly small line item numbers.
Yeah.
And this goes back to my earlier question. The amount that's going to be spent for remediation of the damage in the hurricane itself is going to be a lot more than these small numbers we have here. My understanding of the process is that you are not you're not forecasting those numbers. You're waiting to get estimates from someone. You're waiting to get insurance proceeds.
Mhm.
But how do you know how much you have to spend? What is the difference between the amount coming in and the amount that you have to spend? Shouldn't that show up somewhere in the budget?
Yeah, well, I think you answered your own question. That's exactly why we couldn't factor that into this budget, because we don't know what's coming in and we don't know what expenses we're going to lay out to repair that hurricane. I mean, it would literally be us sitting in a room and guessing at that point with really having nothing to point those numbers to other than just speculating. We think we're going to get this and we think it's going to cost us this.
But every business deals with unknowns.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yours included, and that's what this whole budget's about. You're
Yeah.
forecasting this. Why aren't you forecasting the cost of
Yeah.
repairs?
Well, again, this budget is the operating budget. So this is what we're using to operate the club. I mean, that's the essence of what we're dealing with here is the operating budget to operate the club on a day-to-day basis. The hurricane is, in my opinion, an independent event, and it is something that we're going to have to manage and we're going to have to do some repairs. But at the end of the day, for at least I'm speaking for the board because we've had this discussion, the only other way to do it is to come out and say, we're going to charge everybody an extra $200 a quarter to put into a hurricane fund. And then we'll use that money once we know what we're going to spend it on, not knowing what those amounts are going to be. And my experience with owners is if we're going to charge you something, You want to know what we're spending it on. And so to me, that was going to be a lot tougher poll to try to speculate. This is what we think it may be. So just start contributing money, especially knowing that many of you are coming out of your pocket for personal items right now. We definitely approach this budget with an even bigger understanding is what did this hurricane impact you personally? We're impacted as a business, but you all, most of you all here are also out a lot of money waiting on insurance proceeds. And so, you know, knowing we were already going to have a significant operational increase, you know, that was a fundamental part of the decision-making was, do we just arbitrarily say everybody kick in an extra couple $100 every quarter, or do we wait until we have a real number and then come back and present it? And the decision was made to do the latter, which I think was the right decision.
So what you're, let me see if I can summarize this. So what you're saying is, as people look at this budget this year, at their cost per unit, they need to understand that it does not cover insurance costs because you did not attempt, or you did attempt, but figured you could not come up with an estimate of insurance costs. And they should understand that there's something in the future coming up that may need an additional assessment that's not in this year's budget.
I've definitely said that. Yes. Yeah. And I've answered a question to that regard. Yep. Yep. Repair costs.
It's a
Repair costs.
And the difference between a repair and the insurance is going to be a cost to the community. And what he's saying is that this budget does not attempt to forecast that.
Right.
People need to understand
That is
that
correct.
that's going to be additional.
You're right.
It could
And
be.
The best way to think about this is pretend that no hurricane happened. And this is our budget for next year. Then we did have a hurricane happen, or it could happen tomorrow, and we'd be still in the same place. We would have to come up with the difference between proceeds that come in from insurance and repair costs. So that's how you handle a significant or special event, because it's the unknown. I mean, and to what Joe said, we could build it into the budget, but the fees would go up from what we have here, 11% to something else. And we would justify it by saying, well, this is just in case we need your money, and we don't want to take money out of the hands of people every quarter. At some point in time, yes, there's probably more than likely the chance that there's going to be this assessment, as I said in our previous board meeting, but we don't know what that will be. But that's what happens in hurricane situations and disaster situations in a club.
My point simply was every business faces the same kind of uncertainties that we face here.
Right. But every
They
business,
don't just push it down the road
no,
because they can't.
no, but you gotta understand that in this business, we always lose money, and the only way we make that up is to say to the members, we need fees. And in a business, there's a way to cut a lot of costs, or freeze a lot of spending, do a lot of things if you think the revenues are gonna come down. But that's their operating. But if a restaurant got wiped out by the hurricane, it would be the same situation. So we have everybody here runs the club. I mean, they contribute to that difference. So we just don't want to pile on that difference in this budget coming up. But we do know, and we've been upfront, there will be additional costs in a special category for hurricane.
I think one other point as far as our reserving. As far as the reserves that we do have in place, that some of the more significant items are already included in that. So there may be not a complete shortfall, but a partial shortfall in that. So I think it's just a matter of identifying which ones are in a shortfall position.
I just want to add one relatively unfortunate thing, and that is we're talking now, you have to keep in mind also that we're talking now about the LCA costs, hurricane costs. In addition to that, some of the associations in some of our neighborhoods, including mine, have been hit very hard by the hurricane. So we will have additional assessments probably for the associations because insurance won't cover everything. And we're using the same process that we're using at the LCA level, at the neighborhood level, And that is because we don't know what we're gonna get in proceeds. We don't know how to decide where we should go, and that we should not assess people now, but we should try to cover major expenses in the best way we can, or as an ongoing thing. And then at the end, we have to reconcile everything. At least that, I think, is the better way of
Yep.
handling the process.
It doesn't give the member. Obviously, doesn't give the membership. Reasonable estimate of what the additional costs are. If you just ignore if you ignore hurricane costs, putting everybody budgets, it's going to underestimate the cost of everybody. That's the
Possibly. Yep.
We don't know what we don't know. We can't tell you what we don't know because we don't know it.
It's obvious. I worked in a business where that happened every day. Yeah. It's just.
This is a different situation.
Well, it's not a defense industry, I get that, but it's a different.
Mr. Ringland,
Any discovered that.
Mr. Ringland.
Yes, going back to some of the things that we do know. The restrooms at the Island Club behind the tennis courts have not been kept up that well. And you're talking about redoing the other 3 restrooms, bocce and the 2 on the golf course. Are there any plans to upgrade those restrooms behind the tennis courts? And in addition, the water coolers throughout the tennis facility haven't been working long before the hurricane damaged them. In addition, the ice machine next to those restrooms, it doesn't appear they're in the budget.
Yeah.
Comment on those?
Sure, yeah. Water fountain issues, and that ice machine, I'll go backwards, that ice machine out there. Both are now on the priority list. We are waiting on a couple of parts to get the ice and water machine working. That did take some storm damage. The water fountain issue, my understanding is Kimberly has a plan to, she's actually outsourced somebody. We've tried to fix them in-house and we can't get some of them working. But she's got a plan where she's going to restage some of the working ones. So we make sure there is water available on both sides of the courts. The restrooms on the tennis, that was not part of this budget, but I think that's something we can take a look at. And I think we can find a way to try to do some improvement there without having to extend too much into the budget. Just so you know, we've put in the budget $5,000 per on-course restroom to update. They're small areas. So I think we can take a look at that. That was neglected. That wasn't part of the original thought with updating the on-course restrooms, was to do the tennis. So we'll look at that for sure.
In addition, those awnings at the Island Club court, apparently it's not just the awnings, structures have failed.
Yep.
They were failing before the hurricane. I just don't understand.
Yeah.
So it's not,
Yeah.
there appears to be no line item in the budget
Yeah.
for
What-
capital expenditures for these things that
Yeah.
have a useful life.
Yeah.
Greater
Yeah,
than
no,
one-
there is. The tennis definitely has reserved items for their assets, but the damage, and you're right, we were already looking at how to repair some of those structures last year before the storm hit, because there were some things we had to overcome. There were some concrete issues there, okay? But that would have been funded through reserves for sure, because there's reserve funding for those assets. However, now that we've taken a huge hit back there, we're waiting to see how they're going to classify that damage. Are they going to classify that damage, the carriers, as a flood event, or are they going to classify that as a wind event? That's a big determination, because we don't have flood coverage, and most people don't have flood coverage for areas that aren't in your building, inside your building, or around it. So if it's a flood event, they're going to say out there, then it's going to be something we're going to have to fund through reserves or through an assessment. If it's a wind coverage event, then we're pretty confident we're going to have coverage for proceeds to repair those items. So those are being looked at, but that's one of those things where until we hear back from the carrier to confirm what those adjusters have said, we really don't know where the funding is going to come to replace those.
Regardless of where the funding comes from, are you saying you're gonna have to wait until you get that information before you can proceed with the restoration of those?
Correct. And that,
aspects of the equipment? Because
absolutely, yes. And that's what we've approached. Anything that hasn't been an emergency repair, you know, anything that would be considered high priority to the normal operation. We are waiting to see what those proceeds are so we can then determine where to go. Doesn't mean that we're not out there trying to secure quotes, because that's the other part of the process, is to be ready to go with that. And we are doing that. Kimberly's working with Welsh and a few other companies to get some ideas on how to replace these things. But we're not going to pull the trigger on replacement for those types of items. And every department has those items. A lot of departments are holding off on things until we know what the funding mechanism is there.
the funding mechanism being the insurance claims, I recall back in some of those Zoom meetings that you were discussing the fact that we had to wait for the adjusters' reports to come to us. And that was like after a month or two, and now we're approaching 6 months. And there was some discussion that we only had a year to file a supplemental claim for things that weren't covered in the initial, and we haven't got
Sure.
the initial yet. How do you
Correct. Yeah.
perceive that process to work out?
Yeah, you're a little bit confused on some of the timing things. I mean, we're really only about 4 months removed from when the adjusters were on property. The reference that I made in terms of 365 days to file a supplement, that was directly in relation to an NFIP flood claim, because that was at the point in time that the governor had said and petitioned the government, the federal government, to push that out to 365. On a property or wind claim, you still have 3 years to file a supplement for that. So the 1 year time frame pertains to flood. That's what that pertains to, is a flood event. So if you live in an association, you're well aware that it's not just Lexington's carrier that's waiting on these adjusters to provide this information. I mean, it's a real issue out there that we're all experiencing, is getting those reports and getting that confirmation from the carrier what their first offer is in terms of settlement coverage there. So we're all waiting on that.
That's for the wind and the property damage, not the flood.
No, LCA has not received a flood report either. Nope,
Right.
they have not.
And aren't you running up against that 1 year timeframe?
We're 5 months removed from the storm, so my math says we have 7 months left. I'm not too concerned about that yet. Yep,
Thank you.
you bet. Okay. Well, good. I got you out here 3 hours early, so, okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you coming. Thank you. We'll see you later, Zoomers. Thank you all. Thank you. Hey, how you doing? That's when I got to stop the recording here. 1 second. So just give me a sec here. One minute here.